Welcome to the World According to Mark on WPVM LP 103.7 FM in Asheville, North Carolina, streaming on WPVMFM.org. My guest today is Palina Prysmakova. Well, I said it better before. Palina Prysmakova. Did I do it right? Okay, excellent. Thank you for being on the show today.
You're welcome. Thanks for inviting.
So this is a little bit of a new show for me in terms of the substance of it, but there are some really interesting crossover reasons why I brought and invited you to be on this show. You are an assistant professor in the School of Public Administration at Florida Atlantic University. You have a CV which is many pages long, detailing a very long academic or a very significant academic career. And it's impressive, and you look much younger than your resume seems to reflect, although you probably skipped a few grades. But in addition to public administration, you can tell us a little bit about what that means. You also did studies at the School of Government in Utrecht University, Netherlands. You were a guest lecturer at the School of Management at the University of Nice. And you've also taken courses for global inclusion and social development at the University of Massachusetts in Boston. And that's just a little description of there are many other things that you've done academically. And you also are a journalist, and you can talk to us a little bit about that. But the primary reason for the audience to understand is Belarus is a country that I think most Americans, if they even know where it is or what it is, don't think much about. In reality, Belarus is a country in Europe. It is the 13th largest country in Europe by landmass and the 20th most populous country in Europe. It has a very interesting history, crossroads of warring factions for centuries, it would appear. Formerly, it was part of the Soviet Union, and it has had a republic, which indicates that there have been elections, and we're going to talk about the scope of those elections. But it's also had a person in charge. Some would refer to him as an autocrat or a dictator since the breakaway from the Soviet Union. And recently, Belarus has been much more in the news, including in America, describing human rights violations stemming from, they've had human rights violations or allegations of violations for years, but most recently there was an election in August of 2020, and a lot of concerns that election was not fair, and it reelected the individual in charge for yet another term. So with that, let me stop talking and ask Palina to sort of give us a sort of a history of herself, your roots, and how you see things. We'll get into that later.
Thank you again for inviting me to the show, Mark. I'm really honored that there is more and more awareness and there's more and more interest to my country, because that's what we're actually missing. And the current, I don't want to call him president, the ex-president, I call him in some circles, has been using this unawareness for his own benefits for a longer time. So it's very important for Belarusian nation to participate in shows like yours. So I'm very grateful myself, and I'm grateful on the behalf of the Belarusian nation. I think I will try to start a little lighter, and again with the geography, going back to where Belarus is. I've been asked this question quite frequently, and I'm gonna cite Dr. Mikhalevich. He was one of the candidates in one of the previous elections for the presidential position in our country, because he was a victim of human rights and he had to give a lot of speeches all around the world regarding that. And very often the question, so where Belarus exactly is, would come up. So he would ask, guys, do you know where Russia is? Mark, do you know where Russia is? Okay, so Russia.
Yes.
So
It's over there.
Right. So Russia is this country located between Belarus and China.
Very good.
As simple as that. So we're right there in the middle of Europe, geographical Europe. We are big in terms of population and Switzerland, Czech Republic, Slovakia, you name. So we're not that small. But overall, the policy, including that one of the government, was kind of hiding us behind the scenes for a long time. And it was achieved, unfortunately, well enough. So we're here to promote our country as well, our culture, our traditions. And there've been a lot of Belarusian organizations here in the United States, not so much in North Carolina, but I'm pretty sure there's a lot of Belarusian, including Asheville. So guys, please form something official together, because we would like to cooperate with you also on like an organizational level, not only individual.
And here that would be helpful if we started a Belarusian restaurant and then more Belarusians would come.
That was a big question. Yeah, I like how we jump from topic to topic. There was a question like this raised recently by one of the commenters to Radio Free Europe, but for the Russian chapter. And one of this, I assume he had some Belarusian background. I really don't know the person well, but that was his comment. That was well read and distributed, that we don't see Belarusian diaspora because there's no many Belarusian restaurants around. And you're right. And my response to that was, who opens restaurants abroad? Those people who have some sort of money to be able to make this investment. And they will do it either for immigration purpose or for investment purpose and so on. So we do indeed see a lot of restaurants around the world. There are Russian restaurants, there's Ukrainian restaurants, there's Georgian restaurants from all part of Soviet Union. And by the way, Georgia is much smaller country than Belarus, but you don't see many Belarusian ones. Why? And we're going back to the same question, what we're discussing here today, because people were not able to accumulate any capital to even think about opening a restaurant abroad. So we do have a lot of people that immigrated through the last years, but they would immigrate like with a suitcase running away from political repressions. And this suitcase would not be full of money, believe me, because there was no opportunity in any fair or even unfair way to capitalize yourself enough to be able to take the money outside of the country. So it's not that we don't have a cuisine. We do have a cuisine, and actually ex-former Soviet Union colleagues know very well all the dishes of Belarusian cuisine. We just were not able to do it. So if you look at people who end up in the United States of America, the new wave, because there was a big wave after the Second World War, when it was 200,000 Belarusians that were running away from the western part of Belarus, from the Soviet regime. They didn't want to become a part under the Stalin. They were afraid of the repressions as well. So 200,000 Belarusians moved to the United States after the Second World War, and they've been living in their own, let's say, diaspora. They have their own churches and schools and monasteries and so on. So there's some leftovers of this diaspora. And then because of the wall, there was not so much movement, as you can imagine, of people. And now we have this new wave of people who moved from Belarus to the United States. And then would be people, as I described, with empty suitcases, if they have any suitcase. There would be students who came here to work for summer job and said they cannot go back and stuff like this. So of course they would not have a student working here on summer job won't be able to open the restaurant. So thanks a lot. I think we could make a separate show on the cuisine next time.
Well, let me mention something. You mentioned the number of Belarusians that came to the United States, an astonishing number, 200,000. When you think, again, at that time, there were significant restrictions on immigration from Eastern Europe to begin with. But preceding that, World War II, Belarus paid an extraordinarily heavy price in terms of devastation to the country, and also lots and lots of folks were murdered or lost their lives in World War II. I know you're much younger than World War II, but you probably have some perspective on just how devastating that was from the civilian population.
For sure, because we grew up with it. We know it, we learn it by heart. So every fourth person in Belarus was killed.
25%.
And just to make it a little bit more clear as well, even though Soviets were trying to call us Belorussia and in all other languages, Vice Rusland and so on, to make us feel Russian, there were not so many Russians. I mean, if we talk about in terms of ethnicity and nationality, living in Russia, in territories of Belarus before the Second World War. There are different statistics, again, depending on which part of Belarus, because we're divided into half. But let's say from 10 to 5%. The majority of people who lived on the lands of Belarus, they've been Belarusians who mostly live on the countryside, and Jewish population who would mostly live in towns. And besides that, we had mosques, and we had, in terms of mosques, it's a long history. So one of our kings in the medieval ages were inviting people from the east, Mongol Tatars, to increase the trade. So it's not any sort of invasion, but historically, it's people living in our lands for hundreds of years. But most of the population was, again, either Belarusian Slavs or Belarusian Jews. So, and we know how terrible the Second World War was for that second group, and the toll that death population as well. But overall, what the statistic we usually give is 1/4 of the people were killed.
So that's again a truly astonishing number, and the history of Belarus as a country or a territory goes back at least 100 years. Is that a fair estimate?
I'm not sure again in the question, Greg. Can you say the statement again?
Yes, Belarus as a recognized country goes back 100 years or more.
That's a good point. Yeah, we just celebrated the 103rd anniversary of Belarusian Democratic Republic that was established in 1918. So that was the first time the Belarus appeared on the international arena, meaning the name itself. But we tend to think of ourselves, and we've been calling ourselves before that for a long time, Lithuanians. So this is not going to be another big show. What's the difference between Lithuania and Belarus? So we've been part of the Great Duchy of Lithuania, if not the heart of the Great Duchy of Lithuania, that was after occupied by the Russian Empire. That had a very little brief moment of liberation when the Republic was proclaimed, and then we got occupied by the Soviets. So our history goes back to the Polotsk kingdom and so on. So, but one little detail that might help people also to understand is the religious aspect, because it always matters in the history. People will not identifying themselves by the nationalities, right? It's something rather new, let's say 100, 150 years old, people start thinking about nationalities. They always think in terms of religions, right? So we've been Christians and then Orthodox Christians since 1,000 something years old, right? So at the moment, Belarus is like the main religion is Orthodox Christianity under the Russian Orthodox Church. But I would like everybody to understand, and many people know about the Great Ukraine and Great Kiev, and that's how Russia got their Orthodoxy. They got it from the Kiev kingdom going up north. We were not baptized by Kiev or Moscow guys. We were baptized by people from Iceland. Can you imagine? Do you know Iceland, where Iceland is?
Yes.
Right. So there were some Iceland missionaries who got the permission from Constantinople to bring Christianity to the Baltic states. And they came through the Baltic Sea and brought it down to us. So we've been Orthodox in developing our church parallel to what was happening in Kiev. And then after the occupations, we were kind of been transformed. So you're Orthodox, so you become Russian Orthodox and so on. So even in terms of history, let's say Ukrainians and Russians have more in common in the church than with us. So the main historical center, the Polotsk, the main historical town, has monuments for the Icelandic missionaries. Like our Christianity came from absolutely another route in the history.
So first of all, let me reintroduce you, and I'll get the pronunciation of your name correctly. We're talking with Palina Prysmakova. I don't know why I'm having trouble with that extra syllable I'm putting in there.
Say Prysmakova.
Makova, Prysmakova, who is the assistant professor for the School of Public Administration at Florida Atlantic University, and has been very involved in issues associated with Belarus. We've been talking about the country of Belarus and its history, and you're listening to us on WPVM LP 103.7 on your dial, WPVMFM.org. So the largest city in Belarus or in the capital city is Minsk. Is that correct?
Sure, it's the largest city, and I would give you again one curious fact: it's the densest city in Europe.
Say that again.
The density, the city.
Oh,
density.
yes, the density. Okay.
The population per square meter, it's the highest in Europe. This is inherited from the Soviet system. Why? Because the city was kind of built fast with high, tall buildings, and all the neighborhood villages were demolished to construct social housing because it was the only way of housing during Soviet Union. So as compared to any other European cities, which starts with the suburbs and then the buildings become higher, rather similar to the United States as well, we have the fields of the crops, the highway around the city, and the tall buildings right away. So the surface of the city is not so big, if you think about it, because we don't have the suburb part. There are only a couple of little neighborhoods left, some for historical reason, another one just because they were not able to finish developing them because it was not in the best part of town, let's say. They have what we call private sector with some private housing, but it's almost negligible. So most of the people live in 5 stories plus apartment complexes, making it very, very dense, and meaning we have a big public transportation system as any dense city requires, and so on. Yeah.
So I want to get into the politics, but before I do that, let's again use your phrase on the lighter side. Obviously with COVID going on, and that's had a very significant negative impact on Belarus, as it has many European countries, but the handling of the COVID pandemic has been less than stellar in your native country. But did Belarus have a significant tourism impact, or did people come there to see particular things and so on and so forth, or has its society been more or less closed and not a great attraction for an influx of tourists?
Before I just mentioned this question, I really appreciate this kind of introduction part, because at the end of the day, all the little details we describe here have a huge impact on the political side of what's going on right now, the density of the cities, the histories, the religion, and so on. So we're kind of putting together all the pieces of puzzle right now on the table, and we're going to just collage them into one big picture. So talking of COVID and the tourism, we've not been a very tourism, how do you say, great oriented, right? For many reasons, including, I assume it was not officially articulated, somebody didn't want to kind of show a country much as well. But yeah, so in terms of tourism, it would be rather rare to see people just going there for sightseeing. We would have some business tourism, like people coming for different business affairs and will stay longer or try to see the country around. But we have other way around, rather big movement of people going outside to see what's going on. So Belarus is #1 country in the world for holding Schengen visas per citizen. So Schengen visa is, I will explain to those who not so much in the European Union, it's a visa that allows you to travel to all European countries. So instead of issuing separate for Germany, France, Italy, so on, you got a Schengen visa for most of the countries of the European Union, and you can travel without restrictions. So we are the country #1 in the world of holders of this visa.
So let me just repeat that again. Schengen is sort of like a made-up region consisting of multiple European countries who have decided at least to make travel easier among those various countries. And does that include Belarus itself?
No, because it mostly overlaps European Union,
Okay.
but some countries have not been part of it. So it's mostly the repetition, because one of the pillars of European Union is free movement of people within the European Union. So the Schengen allows people from outside of European Union to come to the territory and be free to move within, not to go through the customs and passport checks and everything, because there's physically no passports and custom checks.
Yes.
So the countries would issue this visa for the continental Europe. Yeah. So, but we're number one holders in the world. I mean, this visa, people from Africa, Asia, Latin America, they all require this visa to enter Europe. But we'll be number one country in the world holding this visa. Meaning, many Belarusians on different occasions keep on going back and forth to Europe. So they know what's going on another side. It's not a wall as it used to be.
So this may be, I don't want this to be a trick question because we still haven't covered sort of the political and human rights issues in any detail yet, but if Belarus citizens have this freedom of movement because of being prime holders of the Schengen visa, why aren't they staying away? Because the things going on in the country in many respects are not good, not pleasant. Do you have a thought about that, or am I misreading it altogether?
I'm not sure what you mean by staying away. So.
In other words, get out of the country and don't come back.
All right, the Schengen visa is a tourist visa. You cannot stay more than 3 months.
Legally, you can't.
Legally, yes, but the story is alive, and Belarus is not so horrible to try to be a legal immigrant. So that's another thing, which goes again back to history. Belarus was the most developed country of all the Soviet Union bloc before it fell apart, in terms of social securities, in terms of standard of living, transportation, medical education, you name. So, and we end up having a lot of people, Russian-speaking people from all countries of the Soviet Union, because when the Soviet Union fell apart, the holders of the Soviet Union passport had the right to choose which citizenship they would like to obtain. So we end up having a lot of people, like I say, especially military retirees and so on, who end up staying in Belarus, despite they're not Belarusians. So we do have a lot of people from that regard as well. But why people do not run away? Because everybody likes to be home, right? So we can go visit, but then you would like to learn something good and bring his best practice home, and then it will become a problem.
Okay, well, let's use that more or less as a jumping off point. Belarus declared independence from the former Soviet Union in 1991, I believe, and adopted a new constitution in 1994. And then Alexander Lukashenko was elected as the first president of Belarus. And interestingly enough, he's still serving in that capacity today. And again, I don't know the length of the history, and you can give us some enlightenment in terms of dissatisfaction or concerns about whether he was appropriately elected or whether the elections were fair. But the last election, there was a fairly significant human protest movement associated with that election. But I think you pointed out when we spoke earlier that that's not really anything new. I mean, it's new in terms of the nature of the protests this time and the amount of repression, but this is sort of the same story, different verse. Is that a fair statement? Or why don't you just tell us about Alexander Lukashenko and his long-term presidency that seems to go on and on.
Right. So as enough of Belarusians like to say right now that he's not a president, he's ex-president, because it's hard to prove, at least that far back in the history, the previous terms, which have been largely faked, at least to my opinion. But you're right in terms of saying that this round we had this mass protest that we have not seen before, and largely that have been possible to the availability of the technology uh, and to the change of generations that do use this technology that happen, and it has not been possible to do before, despite, as you properly mentioned, uh, the problems with human rights started from the with disappearing people, with people in prison with sentences that are not fair, with all sort of discrimination, allegations, and injustice. So the only difference now we're able to share it faster. The faster you share this information, the more it goes to the wider circles, and those, let's say, who prefer to keep the status quo, saying we don't want to hear, we don't want to know. Um, it's hard to ignore when it's just attacking you from all the sides, the truth. So it's harder to pretend that it does not concern me, and the scale that I don't want to say multiplied, it's just progressive. He knows everybody, like or at least everybody's family. As for now, we have more than 35,000 arrests. For, as you mentioned, we have about 10 million people, but there's not 10 million people in the country. They say roughly about 2 million is always abroad. So let's say for 8 million people, 35,000 arrests isn't good enough to touch every other family, if not each family. So that's when you cannot ignore it anymore, because it's not somebody who lives down the street. It really happens with you right now. So I guess I would need more like follow-up questions on you, because
let me
comment at the same time. Yeah.
Sure. Well, let me follow up. First of all, how often are there presidential elections in Belarus? Every 4 years? Frequently.
Right. The person we've been discussing here attempting and successfully attempted to change constitution on several occasions.
You're talking about Alexander Lukashenko. Okay.
Including extending terms, extending the amount, how many terms you could be a president, and so on. So yeah, the latest rotation was about 5 years.
Okay. And what you were saying a moment ago was there has always been concern among people that know as to whether any of the preceding elections were fair, but because of the benefits of social media and people getting the word out, and I suppose, again, we haven't talked about what you've been able to do journalistically, but apparently it's more clear now that Alexander Lukashenko is holding power illegally, which is why you referred to him as the ex-president. And so that's what I'm hearing that you say. And if you want to embellish on that.
I would correct, just because the border between illegally and illegitimate is quite thin, but we definitely know that he's illegitimate. Whether or not he's illegal, it needs to be proven, right?
Okay. So
we have facts which have been masterfully destroyed all through.
Okay.
And also another reason to think why the election have not been correct, whether he would not let independent observers to observe them, or these observers would end up there, would end up in the prison. Or there was one of these elections, again, I would not remember because just so many of them, when he himself stated to some Western media that he faked them. He said, of course, I faked them. This 82%, I faked them because the real numbers were 95, but nobody would believe me. So he would even say himself that he's faking them, but to lower the numbers, right? So then what comes up right now, more and more in the discussions, is how much aware he is of the real numbers himself. So if there is a, I don't know how to explain it, not a break in the chain, but how much he's informed of the real statistics as well. He's been very well protected by his nearest clique, including those people who have been faking elections for him.
So he could have what we have called in this country plausible deniability. So if there was illegitimacy in the election, or if there were more votes for the opposition, he might be insulated from that, is what you're saying, by people who are really controlling the election and controlling the election process.
Right, because I think the people closest to him knows the best of what he can do and what sort of repressions can follow and so on. So I think there would be enough interest of the closest people to him who help him fight the elections, not to disclose the real numbers, just being scared of the possible consequences for them directly. So the question is, we don't even know how much his I don't know if it's English, right? Is it what is it in English? Bluffing? Like how much he is really.
Is he making it up, or is he deliberately lying? Okay.
Yeah, deliberately lying, or he's firmly convinced that these are the real numbers, because he's been detached from the population for quite some time.
My guest, Palina Prysmakova, a professor, assistant professor at School of Public Administration, Florida Atlantic University. We're talking about Belarus, and we're talking about rigged elections and fake elections. And that sounds surprisingly familiar to folks in the United States, because we've just gone through several months in which the election of the president was roundly criticized by supporters of ex-president, I think I can say that effectively, ex-President Trump, and defended by those who voted for President Biden. But we are, unfortunately, in this country, not immune from some of the same issues about whether an election is legitimate, whether people have been prevented from voting, whether there's been, people illegitimately voting. And now we're going through a period of time where there's a reaction, primarily by the Republicans, to try to repress voters by erecting all kinds of conditions. But we're not talking specifically about the United States, but when you talk about the legitimacy or illegitimacy of the elections in Belarus, do people feel free to vote anyhow, regardless of how it's tabulated? And what have the opposition candidates that presumably ran against Alexander Lukashenko, what do they have to say about this?
Sure. Again, I hear too many questions, so let me jump on one at a time.
Okay.
I'm so happy you're voicing them. That's the thing. We don't know what you guys don't know. So some things that we grew up with, it's so natural. We cannot even imagine that it have not crossed somebody else's mind, for good reasons, of course. First of all, I would like to refer to the letter of the Belarusian Ministry of External Affairs that was issued to the United States Embassy last week, because we're celebrating the 103rd anniversary of the Belarusian Republic, and the embassy sent it congratulations in this regard, right? So the response letter was pointing very clearly to everything you just mentioned, to this conflict, or would say division of views that have been happening in the United States, very seriously offering a helping hand to be a mediator. Lukashenko is offering to be a mediator to resolve you guys' conflict. So if you still don't know who can help you, it's official, it's on the levels of the ministries. He's offering to be the mediator to the friendly US nation to resolve you guys' internal domestic problems. So we as Belarusians are very well aware of what's going on in the United States. And Lukashenko has been using it again to kind of redirect the attention of people and showing what's going on in the most developed economically the most democratic country in the world, to kind of hide his case or justify his case, or just kind of point out that it's internal affairs of our country. Look, guys, you should take care of yourself first, this sort of thing. But this letter that came out last week from the ministry, I was trying to translate it to some friends of mine. I think I will do the job of just translating in English some social media thing. It's so disrespectful. I mean, it's written like a feuilleton. You cannot believe it, the type of language is used there. I mean, there's some sort of the rules of the diplomacy. There's things you're not supposed to say because it's not how you say it. I mean, the letter included references that, hey guys, we can also send you tractors to Alaska since you're not developing the agriculture there, and we can co-share the management of these lands. It's like all sort of absolutely
Patronizing and demeaning statements made. Is that what you're saying? That basically,
right, but it was all written in kind of a, I don't want to say stupid, but a joke form.
I see.
You know what I mean? In the language that is it's in a common language, that there's a language of diplomacy, and despite everything being on, but we had a very strong school of diplomacy before, and at least they've been playing within the international standards and rules of how embassies communicate with the ministries and so forth and so on. This letter is just like a feuilleton published on somebody's social media post. So, but this is one thing, just to referring and to letting you know that we very well know what's going on in the country.
Just to intersect there, we're accustomed now, because of the way in which the Trump administration and Donald Trump himself communicated, to loose language being used as in place of diplomatic parlance, because
right.
Trump's favorite way of communicating, and now many of his still supporters, is to use tweets and to use social media and to retweet things that are doubtful and in terms of their validity, but as well as to things are being said that are outrageous, and then the response is, well, I was only kidding. So you're seeming to suggest that that's very similar to what it has been done recently to justify.
Right. So by no means I'm saying that Lukashenko invented this style. I completely agree with you that Trump was at least the first whom I heard using, as you said, loose language. But one thing is, again, when you use it on the social media, another one when you write an official letter, an official blank stamped with all the signatures of the ministers, and you send it officially to the embassy. I think there still can be the difference between how this letter can be communicated to general public as compared to what's written an official document. And that's what has been written in an official document. It's not a post or tweet saying that we would like to develop Alaska lands. So, but going back to our election, so we know well what's going on in the United States.
Well, let's go. Let's go back. Now, again, I first became aware of the significant human rights violations in the protests for the most recent election by listening to some BBC reports. You mentioned 30,000 people had been arrested, but what I got out of this report was that people were just beaten savagely in the streets. People were hauled off to prison and beaten some more. I don't know how many of these 30,000 people who have been arrested are still in jail, and what charges have been levied against them, and whether there's anything that resembles due process. But do you have a sense of any of that?
I unfortunately do. So I don't know where to start. I think I would mention again that this is by no means first time happening. The person I referred to already, Dr. Mihalevich, who was a candidate for the president, one of those who've been suffering for even trying to run against, have been giving his speeches all around the world about the tortures that he went through when he was in a special prison, when he was caught after the elections.
Well, members of your own family,
members,
your father.
After one of the elections, actually before, that's the favorite tactics of Lukashenko too. He likes to neutralize people and to scare them before any sort of elections. So yeah, my father ended up in the prison, what I would say 15 years ago, about that, for attending a meeting with a candidate, for attending a meeting with opposition candidate. He was not caught up in the meeting, but when he was leaving, so he was stopped by the bunch of the policemen. The main argument for stopping him was to check his documents, that they like to do. And then he, as they like to do, to say, resisted
arrest.
Right. and that's how he ended up in the prison. So, but when you read, and he spent like more than 2 weeks in the prison for administrative charges. But the main line when he was stopped over the middle of the street, if you look at his case, it has because he was dressed like a foreigner. So because he was dressed like a foreigner, whatever it means, they stopped him to identify his identity. That led blah, 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 blah. But in reality, it was that because he showed up and the opposition candidate, meaning they wanted to scare everybody who even considering this person.
Make an example of
all
it.
the elections, yes, that they like to do, because physically our prisons are overflown right now, right? Just before the last elections, there was a lot of amnesty. There was a lot of real criminals who were let out on the streets to make sure there's enough space to catch people like my father, right?
So they let out the real criminals, so to speak,
Right.
to create space to house the protesters under doubtful charges.
They did not anticipate, let's say, the scale, but they knew there will be a lot of them. And having said that, they're overcrowded. They have 30 plus people in cells of 10 and so on. So they've been even talking, I think it was about a month and a half ago, again, on official level, that they want to all of a sudden build what they called it differently, but basically concentration camps, just because they do not have enough facilities where to temporarily preserve people before you give them charges. So we do not have enough facilities in that country to keep up with the demand of our illegitimate, governor to collect all the protesters. If I may, I'll go back to the question you asked about the freedom to vote, like if we Belarusian have freedom to vote. One little difference thing again, which goes back to the history of the Soviet times. The elections been part of the Soviet system as well. You believe it or not, but there have been elections, right? The question is, they most of the time were rather predetermined, and everybody knew the outcome, the consequences, but there was always this official part of election day, and it was always considered to be a holiday. People will dress their best, people will bring flowers, there will be concerts at the election spots. In the Soviet Union times, it was a big holiday with all the sort of animation you can imagine. So those kind of even reluctant to go and vote, they would still go just because it's one of the biggest parties that you can imagine going on in town.
So it was very celebratory, but that does not suggest in any way, shape, or form that the election was open and fair. And I'll let you comment on it, either in terms of who actually was running, because I'm gathering that there must have been barriers set up for people to get on the ballot to begin with.
Sure, yeah. But the process itself, the institute of voting, that you have a piece of paper, you need to mark your candidate, and there's descriptions and so on, and you put it in the urn, and then there's some counting of the votes, whether they've been counted or not, this I don't know. But the population knew that this is some sort of a holiday, and let's say even those who didn't like it or who were against the system back then, but it was well accepted all through that it's some sort of festivity going on in that day. And the elections that started after the fall of the Soviet Union were very much following the same pattern, because we often have the election, how do you call it? I'm lacking the right word. Not the districts, but the voting locations themselves.
Yes.
Yeah, they are most of the time located in the public schools. And it would be the headmaster of the public school who is responsible for organizing, decorating, and the canteens of the school was the one who bake new cakes and create all the fancy food you can imagine. So you not only vote, but you have a fancy lunch, and the whole scene is like with the concerts and so on and so on. So that have been kind of inherited back then. So people used to like to go to vote, even me being as a child, oh, this election day, let's go, it's going to be fun, right? So I would be happy to go with my parents and grandparents to the election play just for the sake of entertainment. And that was the point, to bring more people to show. But
there was great support for the election, and that the election was ultimately a good thing, but it was all for show, is what you're saying.
With the show, they could not say that people did not vote, right?
Right. Well,
turn around.
again,
always a turnaround, right?
yeah, again, to sort of give a parallel, what we saw in the election in the United States, from the primaries through the November 3rd, was rallies, which were mostly staged by Donald Trump, in which people were gathered and had a really good time. They weren't dressed in fancy clothes, but they all had red hats on, and they all seemed to be really, enjoying themselves.
Right.
So,
But since Lukashenko showed up in an arena of managing Belarus, so there was still this generation of mostly people who were brought up and grew and matured and lived most of their lives in the Soviet system. So they would naturally adopt it. But as these people die just because physically there is time, right? The new generation is not familiar with that, right? With all this holiday, fun, entertainment part of it. And there's more and more about what is election for, what's the point, or how it's supposed to look like, what's supposed to stand behind, why we're here at the end of the day, and so on. But we tried, I would say we Belarusian people, we tried different things with Lukashenko. We tried creating one candidate on different times of elections, right? Because there's so many, there were so many opportunities to try all the strategies you can imagine. We would nominate one opposition candidate from all independent parties, just one, to see if this one person can get any considerable percentage to be at least contrasted to the guy. And could you imagine that all parties, left, right, communists, liberals, whatever, they would all unite just with one goal. Okay, agree this guy will represent all of us just for the sake.
not splitting the vote.
Right, to split the vote. This failed. We tried having I think 10 or 12 candidates running against him just to show exactly opposite. Okay, so let's try at least everybody gets 5%. So altogether it will be 50, right? It didn't work. The last one before this that happened in August, it was complete. It was an action of ignoring the elections. I've been in Belarus that day. People ignored the event. Everything was describing you all these parties, and there was nothing that would identify even elections are happening in the country. So people did not show up at all, and the result was the same. So no matter what we tried, and we're patient because we wait 5 years in between, right? At least the population overall, we always bring to the same result. So we never tried violent protests, and it was never the point. So this time around, we tried again the option I have not tried before, which is a mass protest, which is possible to organize or to happen because of the generation change.
So let me understand that then. I think what you're saying, and you're explaining yourself very well, so I'm not trying to substitute, is the younger generation who was not entranced by the parade, the circus mentality, the festive, they're getting smarter and more skeptical and more concerned about the substance of the elections. And so sort of a generational change has sort of shifted. And now there seems to be a more serious effort to try to get a free election, to try to get somebody in office other than the fellow who's been there for years and years. And is that a fair statement?
To an extent, as we see that at the end of the day, there are all levels of the society that joined the protest. But I would say that it was fueled mostly by, let's say, this new generation, and one at the end of 80s or maybe mid 80s to the 90s, where all their conscious life, they've only seen one person being the manager of the country. So, but all the adjectives that you name describing them, I say the most important here would be comfort. Um, this generation, as according to me, again, being in and out the country for the last 18 years, being observing how people live and how people of my generation live in different parts of the world, this generation is comfortable enough in terms of their overall life to be able to question or to raise this sort of questions. So let me put it this way: the '90s were very sad times in terms of economy, in terms of transition, in terms of learning what is business, how it can be run, in terms of learning that now you're responsible for yourself. Before that, it was always the system for everything. The system was for everything you like, but for everything you don't like. But there was always somebody on top of you who's responsible to solve your problems, whether they do it or not. But it was not your responsibility. And all of a sudden, it's up to you. And it does not happen over the day, uh, or over 10 or 15 years just to accept it as a nation, right? So this heritage of the mentality been long enough, but people have been poor and they've been living in a very poor conditions to be able to think on higher levels, right? Everything they experienced in the 90s, they've been happy not to experience it again. And Lukashenko used this comfort as the main tool of, like not the tool, it was, I would say it was an exchange, like knowing what's gonna happen tomorrow in exchange of you let me do what I want. Because this crisis of the 90s, it shaked everybody again, all the families and all the system, which is not something you can go all day. But this new generation does barely remember 90s. They're already brought up in the comfort of that's how it is, knowing of tomorrow, which Lukashenko created himself. Okay, I have this to eat, I have this school to go, I have this dentist to fix my teeth. That's actually one of the jokes kind of I always tell to my students here in the United States what's the difference between American social system and the Belarusian one, or the system. So if I may, again, a little bit lighten up the, the conversation. So in the United States, if the family would like to buy a new fridge, right, for the kitchen, you just go and get a new fridge. Whether you buy it cash, whether you get a loan, whether you get a mortgage, whether you get it in rates, whatever. Okay, you need the fridge because it's broken. Tomorrow you have a fridge. If you need to fix a tooth, the entire family need to save money to be able to put a new tooth or fix your tooth, right? So in Belarus, it's absolute other way around. You want to fix your tooth, you can go maybe even today. But if you want to buy a fridge, the entire family and probably extended family need to save money, not for 1 year, to be able to buy a fridge. And here's a kind of rhetoric question. Is it better to have a tooth or is it better to have a fridge? Right?
It's a rough choice.
Right, it's a rough choice. But so that comfort that maybe you don't have the fridge right away, but eventually happen, but at least my tooth doesn't hurt, was exchanged for letting the guy do whatever he wants to do.
So what you're saying, as I understand it, is there is a certain level of social services that are provided by the government through the government, as in health services. But in terms of the availability of consumer goods and creature comforts, if you're familiar with that term, those are less available just because the economic circumstances don't permit people to have ready cash to buy a new refrigerator or a new TV or a new computer. Is that a fair statement?
This is a fair statement that has been happening through the years. It's not fair statement as of today or the recent years, but that's exactly what have been happening through the years. Look, I speak English to you. I went to regular public school. I speak German, right? I play piano. I was from no rich family. I mean, I was from not poor family, but let's say the toilet bowl in my mom's apartment has not been working for 5 years when I grew up. You know what I mean? So there's a lot of things that, you see, I didn't have a toilet bowl. My water was not flushing, but I was reading Shakespeare in English. You see what I mean?
Yes. Choices had to be made.
I had a piano in my home, you know? So that's the thing, but this allowed to kind of, I mean, the people are very well educated in Belarus compared also, again, a lot of other ex-Soviet countries, including all the Stan countries, Uzbekistan, Tatarstan, Tajikistan, and so on. So people are very well educated. We're very well, how do we say, equipped to use the technology. we grew up having internet, which was rather expensive, but all sort of software that exists all around the world, corrupt. I mean, with broken licenses and everything. But of course, none of these big corporations would ever go to Belarus to try to see anybody who has no money for using them. But in the lack of fuzz entertainment, because let's say my generation knew that even this election scene is not fun anymore because we know what's behind, we would put ourselves in the computer, in learning what's outside the world, in learning all the software, the drawing something in Photoshop as a regular hobby for let's say my generation, just because I have nothing else to do. There's nothing fun going on. So this generation has got a lot into technology, and it's not 1, 2, 3 people, it's rather overall the country that make it again possible. And also they got discomfort in terms of their teeth were not hurting anymore, right? So they can focus on something. Okay, so what we want from life. We ate something, we slept well, we have a tooth broken, so let's demand something more out of that train.
So we just have a few minutes left. I wanted you to at least acknowledge the fact that you, while you've been speaking on a personal level, you are secretary of RADA. Can you just quickly tell us what that's about?
Recently I've been nominated to serve as a secretary of RADA of Belarusian Democratic Republic. This is the institution that was created in 1918, the anniversary of which we have been celebrating recently. And it existed most of its time in exile, waiting to resign. And the whole purpose of this institution is to resign as soon as possible, as when the Belarusian people will live in decent conditions and will be empowered to define their own future. So we still have been observing and hoping that it's going to happen soon. But just to make clear, as Mark said here, everything that we discussed before, it's my personal opinion based on the years of the research of the professor. I'm not representing the opinion of RADA in any form.
So I guess as a concluding remark, are you hopeful that things will begin to improve and that some of the sweeping human rights violations will abate?
I'm not hopeful. It's happening. So I am. I mean, there's a lot of suffering right now. I understand it. I respect and I bow to all these people who going through that. But it's inevitable. The question is the patience and continuation of moving forward. There is no way back at this moment.
You see yourself going back to Belarus in the near term?
Oh, as soon as possible, sure. I am the citizen of Belarus. I never asked any other citizenship of any other country. I would love to work in the school, which is National Academy of Public Administration. It exists in Minsk, but it's called the National School of Public Administration in the name of Lukashenko. So as soon as this name would move up from the title, I will be more than happy to serve my own nation and work.
Well, thank you very much. Good luck to you. I hope that happens. My guest today has been Palina Prysmakova, and I said it wrong again, but it was close enough. I want to thank you for being on the show and talking to us about Belarus.
Thank you.